everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. One more time. We're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all so much. On behalf of the Center for Global Development and our partner in organizing this event, Theirworld, I want to welcome you to our event on increasing financing for the early years, where we're bringing together the early childhood development, childcare, and early childhood education agendas to explore the returns for children, women, and economies. My name is Mary Barrowman. I am a policy fellow in CGD's Gender Equality and Inclusion program, where childcare and the broader care economy are core to our work on women's economic empowerment. Today, I'm going to be acting as your event host to guide you through the different pieces of this substantive event, where we'll be exploring the financing landscape, what is working, and how to move forward the most strategically in a time of fiscal constraints and foreign aid cutbacks. To kick us off, I am honored to introduce the president of the Center for Global Development, Dr. Rachel Glenister. Prior to joining CGD in September 2024, she has served as chief economist at the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, FCDO, and the Department for International Development in the UK, and as executive director of JPAL. Thank you, Rachel, for providing us opening remarks today.
Thanks, and welcome to CGD. I'm glad you all made it at the end of this long and hectic week we've all had. I'm delighted to kick off this discussion. And I want to start with a personal story, my personal story about the early years, which is I'm on a panel of experts on the evidence on education, and that meets regularly, looks at the literature, and advises governments about what are the most cost-effective things to invest in education. And when I started this discussion, my membership of the panel, I went in convinced that while we had lots of evidence that investments in the early years were critically important, and that there had been highly intensive programs that had made very long-term impacts on children's lives all the way through to adulthood, so clearly these years were very important, I was not convinced at that point that we should be advising governments to do investments in preschool and early childhood education nationwide, because I was not convinced that we had the right models to do this at scale and cost effectively. But I've changed my mind. And indeed, the panel has changed its mind because the evidence is now in. And two things happened. First of all, there was a lot of innovation by the people in the sector to work out how to get those incredible investments and deliver them cost effectively at scale, so that governments actually had programs that they could do on a nationwide basis. So they took the highly effective programs, but figured out how to do them more cost effectively. The other thing that happened is that I spent a lot of time with my psychologist colleagues on the panel, who convinced me that there was a lot of evidence that economists were missing. And that was because some of the benefits were measured in a way that don't normally make it into economist literature reviews. And I think this is one of the benefits of bringing these multidisciplinary panels together. So I'm now excited to be promoting this work. The other piece, though, of this work, which you heard about and these investments, is that it's not just about childhood learning. So I came to this topic from childhood learning, but there are many other aspects and many other benefits of these early childhood investments in the early years. So my colleague Kahinde, who's here, along with her co-authors, have a great study that looks at the diverse benefits of investing in the early years and early childhood and preschool investments for women as well as the economy. So in this study, they examine the impact of introducing childcare centers in villages in Burkina Faso, one of the poorest countries in the world and one I've been privileged to work in It was evaluated through a randomized trial, and despite interruptions from COVID, women used the centers, they worked more outside the home, and children performed better in developmental assessments. So returns to these investments vary by context, but the estimates suggest that they range from 3-to-1 returns in Nigeria to 7-to-1 returns in South Africa. So why is it important to be talking about this topic now? Well, despite notable progress, according to the World Bank, 350 million children still lack access to early childhood care and education. So it's a great topic, important returns for multiple different actors, and I look forward to the discussion of how do we make this a reality.
Thank you, Rachel, for providing those opening remarks. We're very excited to hear that your mind was changed and that the minds of others were changed. I think we're hoping that our conversation today will help us continue to change minds and figure out how to, again, be the most strategic right now. I'm now going to invite to the stage Sarah Brown and Her Excellency Nadia Feta. Welcome to the stage, and thank you for the fireside chat today. Sarah Brown is the former president and now chair of Theirworld and executive chair of the Global Business Coalition for Education. Today, she is joined by Her Excellency Nadia Feta, the Minister of Economy and Finance in the Kingdom of Morocco. She is the first woman appointed to this position and was previously the Minister of Tourism, Handicrafts, Air Transport, and Social Economy. Sarah, over to you.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Dr. Lindsay, for your remarks. The mind changing is always an important thing because we've worked with so many people who dig in and don't, so that's really refreshing. But I think also at Theirworld, we started out as a children's charity focused on the best start in life, but go through education, go through youth skills, and keep looping back to this. So this it is the evidence that's coming to the fore around the economy and the economic benefits, but also so many of the social benefits, particularly for women and families, which we'll lead into in our conversation. I'm very excited we have the Minister here. What's been so interesting is the dynamic at the moment where we've seen so many moments with countries where, in South Africa in the countdown to the G20, they've put early years right at the heart of some of the messaging there. We saw it in Brazil last year, and there's been huge, profound shifts there in Brazil for the national investment. We've seen it in Philippines, in the United Kingdom. The Education Department have put it to the fore in the new plan for change. In Jordan, the government has launched its first ever national childcare policy. So these are countries that are moving it, but we're really excited to have you here today because what Morocco's been doing is so interesting. And in your role now as the Minister for Economy and Finance, but you also have a background where you've touched on this through all kinds of ways working with families in the country. So I'd like to start, Your Excellency, by talking to you about what you've been doing in Morocco, what that investment means, why you've chosen to make it, and what you think the big differences are that that's making there.
Thank you first for having me. I'm not the expert of, I would say, early schooling, but in my capacity of Minister of Economy and Finance, I'm happy to share, I would say first, that Morocco is definitely committed to globally reform schooling and education. We all talk about the demographic dividend in so many countries, in Morocco, in Africa, but this needs to happen. It cannot be just a potential. And I think all the governments all over the world have been always struggling reforming education, which we've been doing in Morocco. And we spend a lot of money. 6% of our GDP goes to education. Of course, a comprehensive strategy, but then we saw that if it is about justice, we have 50% of population living in rural world, large poor pockets. We saw that those children coming to school at age of 6 were not prepared in the same way to benefit from the other investments done by the government. And this is why we knew that we wanted a preschooling strategy that we started some years ago. And maybe to give you two figures, and we are very proud of the results. In 2018, we had less than 45% of the children who were preschool, from 4 to 6. And this year, we achieved 83%. And in the rural world, we had 3 times the number, moving from 32 to 92% of the children benefiting from this preschooling.
So this drive from the government to be able to say, right, let's make the investment, and actually seeing the numbers shift. So what you're starting to see is just increase involvement and engagement and attendance enrollment. But of course, the next question is going to be about what the impact is and what the outcomes are, and making sure that that is making the right difference. But that starting point of enrollment is so critical, making that decision. You've got to sign off numbers as the finance minister, and know that that return will come when they're ready for school at the other end. As part of your experience, and we love talking to finance ministers because we know that's where the decision gets made, even if you're not the expert right at the coalface. But what do you think have been the opportunities, in making the investment, but also some of those challenges? If you're starting to talk to, another finance minister colleague and they're asking for your advice, what do you think has been the kind of easy, most straightforward part, and what are the challenges?
I liked very much in your remarks that the fear is probably what is the right model to implement. Because I said that we were spending 6% of our GDP in education. We had to add 3 billion dirham, almost $300 million a year for preschooling. A lot of money, but in comparison, it's, I would say, affordable if it was to be properly implemented. So the methodology was very important, and we needed to have a dedicated team for this, and a team that knows very well the ground. The ground is the villages, the cities, different regions. So we have a national initiative that is named the National Initiative for Human Rights, and they had other experiences in other fields. So they know how to, I would say, partner with civil society, with all the, I would say, other stakeholders locally. And then we also build a foundation with our civil servant coming from the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of Interior, because it had to succeed. So I think that what the Ministry of Economy and Finance was putting in the balance is that for sure we need to fund for this, but we need also to have the proper organization, to have the proper setup, and this is what we measure. And we leave it to the Ministry of Education to assess that these young girls and boys coming to school at 6 are benefiting much more from what they are having from the academics.
So you're still going to be waiting to see those outcome numbers to see what difference they're making. But I think, thinking of Dr. Glenister's remarks that we need to see the evidence, and hearing that, CG Dev is working on some of that, making the case for it, and that strengthens exactly what how you're going to make that decision. And certainly at Theirworld, we've put out in recent years, and it wasn't possible to do this before, the case around the kind of childhood development experience, brain development. We now have all kinds of technology where you can actually scan, the developing brain safely, which shows us the difference. You can actually see that through the scans as much as you can see it on the economic balance sheets. So I believe that the case is getting stronger and stronger. But there clearly is still more research and innovation. You're going to want to see better value for money. You're going to want to see smarter investments that you can make from the finance ministry. What would you recommend to innovators, to researchers, to teams? Where do you want more information to come from? What do you need more than just the grassroots evidence, which I'm not diminishing in any way, but it's what's your advice? Because, here we are somewhere where people think about the future.
Maybe we are lucky in Morocco, but no one asked us to bring the evidence to spend for preschool in child. So I'm lucky, and hopefully on my way back, they won't be calling me in Parliament and asking for evidence. So hopefully they are not streaming in the Moroccan Parliament. No, I think maybe put it in simple figures. We have 300,000 boys and girls that are leaving school at different ages. And we have a commitment. We put it the other way around. I said, we want results. My government have been here for 3 years, and we took the commitment that within 5 years, we went at least to save a third of them. So it's up to us to say, let's try anything we can, from preschooling to new, I would say, schools, to new training of educators. We are not sure today that we have all the, I would say, the tools to say each action, this is the real impact. So it's a comprehensive strategy, but for sure we know today that, because we have in our education reform, new label schools. We started with 600 schools all over Morocco, and we measure the results properly. And we are seeing that those children who are going to preschooling are making much better results. We choose 3 KPI, 2 languages, because we speak Arabic and French, and bad English, as you see, and mathematics. And we are seeing today that in these schools we are having real successes, but you cannot be testing just from the age from 6 to 10. To have the reform successful, we needed also the children between 4 and 6 to be prepared, and then we are preparing ourselves for the next phase. The other impact, and sorry to talk economy, but you are pushing me to speak figures. I was not. The other thing is that it has a real impact on the communities locally, because the choice we have made is that we have this framework, civil servants, foundations, but we are working with associations because they are the best prepared to bring the solutions. So we are opening like 60,000 classrooms, which means 55,000 jobs with, I would say, people who are living locally, having education training. And then we have moms that can afford to have a job, or maybe just to rest and better prepared to have their children back home. So we have a real, I would say, impact economically also in the community. And this is very important for the Ministry of Finance and the government in general.
I think you've set out some really interesting challenges, actually, that I think, you know, the sector that's so interested and committed to early years can actually hear directly from you what those KPIs you're looking for. But the other thing I find really encouraging in your remarks is how quick those results are. You know, that you're actually seeing a return on children going, and the benefits of their learning and their development are coming quite quickly, which you don't often hear from a finance minister who's, you know, one step back from the early years frontline.
On that one, I think that I'm telling you the short story of the last year, but I think my country has been trying to reform for years. And we learned from past, I would say, failures. We learned from other countries. But we also set the social state in our government under the guidance of His Majesty as a priority number 1. Because we want to grow our economy. But you cannot not look at education and social challenges, because we are in the government, we are a lot of people coming from private sector, and from the financial sector. But even as finance people and economy people, we know that you need the infrastructure, you need people who are having confidence to have the background. So our engine is also economy, but economy goes through education. And this is a real commitment. It's not, I would say, and really the moment we were running for election and it was our proposal, they wouldn't believe us because we are people from the money side. But we are all committed to make it a real success. So we've been trying hard to reform, we've been learning, and the other things that we are doing for the results is that we are measuring every 6 weeks in these new classrooms that we are opening the results. So we allow also ourselves to be agile and flexible and to say, okay, we are getting it right, we can speed up, or we are getting it wrong. And this is really a mindset to change. The other thing that we have is that we needed to have a conversation with the teachers and the academic world. And we had strikes in the street because they said you cannot be involved, we are the experts. And we needed to build trust. This is 1 year that we spent to discuss with them. We had the unions against us, of course, because they don't believe you and they don't just trust you day one. And this is something also we would like to share, to say, listen to them. They know the children, they know the classroom, they have something to say, but we need also to tell them, trust us, maybe we can give you some other toolkits and this is another big investment that we have been doing, and increasing the wages also of the teachers was something very important, to recognize that their role in the society is a major one also.
And these are all really powerful lessons for that thing of learning as you develop something to improve it as you go along. At the World Bank Spring meetings this week, there are discussions underway for the world's first international summit on investment in early childhood development and for financing it, more specifically. So there are a lot of people here today listening online. That's what they're focused on, is how to get to the point where we can have a global summit. What are the opportunities that you see for Morocco to contribute to this global effort, to be able to share your experiences and best practices as you've been doing today, but also help shape those conversations, on innovative and sustainable financing for early childhood?
Again, I think for us it's an ongoing reform, very encouraging, because we are very happy with the results. And we are happy actually to open books and say this is how we did it. Second thing is that we think that we need government money to start, and we also need the money of MDBs to start, but then to leverage on this, because I think civil society can contribute and want, but they need to channel this money properly. So I think that the first dollars needs to come from governments, but needs also to be, I would say, encouraging other money that can flow. So we are working with municipalities, with the regions, with other stakeholders, and they're today happy. Either they pay for the classroom, or they pay for a part of the wages, or just they take care of transporting the children, because some of them don't go to preschooling because they cannot walk 2 kilometers a day. So you have so many other ways to contribute, but someone needs to spend the first dollars, and I think it's governments with MDBs and the international financial community.
But yeah, it brings us on to that thorny topic, because we're seeing, international aid cutbacks, we're seeing a lot of fiscal constraints around the world, but also there are pathways really for sustainable development. There's the work with the MDBs that you're talking about. There's the innovative financing instruments. There's greater private sector. We're hearing a lot of conversations about private sector partnerships. What do you see as the way to kind of be able to use those opportunities? Or do we think there's more work to do to kind of unfold what innovative financing looks like or private sector engagement looks like?
I think first we need to keep being optimistic, because I think that you are here sharing the same values, and we need to trust that it is right to have preschooling. We have headwinds right now, and we should share the good example and change the narrative. Because if we see statistics on reforming education and preschooling, the numbers are not good. So let's focus on the good, on the success story, and not and share. I would say the experiences, and listen to the academic world, and also push them for more studies, for more innovation. We haven't time to talk about technology. I think what is happening today and next will probably make it less expensive and more efficient.
But these issues around whether the private sector could actually play a part in that is a different engagement, to have government and civil society and private companies play a part of it. And also with the advent of the new International Financing Facility for Education, that might be a pathway through to leverage funds. Let's just finish on the topic of women and families. Let's come back to who it really helps. You've made huge strides with that focus on the investment into women and families. Tell us a bit about that investment in the childcare economy and how that affects women and families particularly.
It's definitely a real solution for the families and the women. First, some of them are involved in this schooling itself, in cooking, in transporting, and some others can even go back themselves to school, find another job, give dignity also to be in a better position to be a good mom. So I think there is a real impact on the economy, because we have to find solutions, flexible solutions for women. And we know that it is logistical, I would say, barriers that are there and are not allowing them to be properly included economically and financially. So again, I think that we need probably more study to link it directly, but we strongly believe that this is a real solution welcomed by families and women.
Minister, thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's been so valuable to have such a powerful, uplifting conversation from a finance minister. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Let me echo thanks for that really interesting discussion. I think we learned a lot in terms of the Morocco case, and really, you really threaded through the returns across so many different sectors, and as well as kind of thinking out. And I really like the idea of being optimistic right now, which can be hard at times. I'm now going to transition to our panel. So I want to go ahead and invite our panelists up to the stage. We're so lucky today to be joined by such a distinguished group of speakers, able to talk to us from a lot of different perspectives. So I want to start off with introducing our moderator. Meniza Entikim is a senior program officer in the Global Early Childhood Development Program for Eastern Southern Africa at the Conrad N. Hilton Foundation. Previously, she was UNICEF's regional advisor for early childhood development in East and Southern Africa. Welcome, Meniza. She will be moderating a panel today with Melinda Bohannon, who is a Director General for Humanitarian and Development at FCDO. Previously, she was the Strategy Director at both FCDO and DFID. Thank you for joining us, Melinda. Next, we have Dr. Luis Benveniste, the Global Director for Education at the World Bank. He previously served as Human Development Director, Regional Director for Latin America and the Caribbean. Welcome, Luis. And last but not least, we have Diana Rodriguez-Franco, who is a Special Advisor on Gender and Diversity to the President of the Inter-American Development Bank, and she was formerly the Secretary for Women's Affairs in Bogota. Meniza, over to you.
Thank you so much. And so first of all, good afternoon to everyone in the room. Oh, yes, we should clap for ourselves. I was going to make them work for their claps, but you're ever so generous. So first of all, I wanted to say a very good afternoon to those of you in the room. And I know we have several people joining us online. So it's good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you stalwarts who are up on a Friday evening listening to a technical conversation on young children. You really are champions. So I think we've had a fabulous start to our conversation today. And I thought it was really interesting how the conversation started with a real focus on pre-primary education, the link to learning, the link to what's needed to get efficiencies in education systems. But it ever so quickly flipped to be about a whole lot more, about jobs, about women's economic empowerment, about Morocco's vision for economic and social development of the country. And I think that's really the key thing that we want to remember today, that we can start on one track of why early childhood or an investment in the early years is important, but it's very soon that we mushroom in and we're basically talking about world peace by the end of it quite quickly. So thank you so much for that conversation before. And I really want to turn to our panelists because I think they really well represent some of the constituencies you were talking about towards the end of the conversation, the importance of government as the lead, but then what is the role of partners, development partners and multilateral development banks, you particularly mentioned as well, banks as well, and I thought that was an excellent segue into our conversation. And I wanted to start with you, if I may, Melinda. You know, Sarah alluded to the fact that in the UK, where we're both from, our government has made a real commitment domestically in the UK to the early years agenda. And I know you don't work on that policy domestically, but I'm wondering how those kinds of arguments about how an investment in the early years is really a strategic investment, if you're thinking about gender equity or learning agenda or health agenda. And I just wonder how much of that plays into how you think about an investment in the early years and your development work.
Yes.
So we'd love some of your reflections on that.
Brilliant, thank you. So much to say on this topic. I thought that was a fantastic fireside chat, so thank you very much. And I guess I should start where Rachel Glenester started, which is the role of evidence. So when you're having to make difficult choices about use of scarce ODA, and as we talked about in the first panel, ODA is very scarce, your most important tool is evidence of what works and has the greatest impact. So when it comes to how we make investment choices, we look really carefully at the return on investment. So for every pound we put in, what do we effectively get out? So it's very important that we think about sustainability, we think about the implications for economic growth, poverty reduction, and we think about the cross-sectoral impacts on things like gender, on things like societal stability and so forth. And that's why education for us has been such an important focus of our investment over time, because there is such strong evidence, particularly, you know, and this is very obvious, it'll be very obvious to many in the room, but the importance of investing in human capital. So an educated workforce and a healthy workforce for economic growth is very clear. So if that's your starting point, you then have to think very hard about, so what is going to be the most effective investment in education? And as described over the years, we've looked at all aspects of that, from preschooling all the way through to investment in skills to work. It's, you know, it's a bit of a minefield, if I'm honest. I mean, anyone that's worked in the evidence on this, you kind of have to look at it very carefully. But it is very clear that having a strong approach to human capital for growth and for poverty reduction is absolutely vital. And I think there's also connections, although I'm not one to quote the evidence back at you, but certainly we've worked with evidence in the past which looks at the links between strong education, adaptive learning, ability to pick up skills and then apply those skills to the world of work. So that's been an important aspect of the way in which we've thought about our investments in education too. Certainly there's a strong connection between education and gender, particularly educating girls. You've heard us talk a lot as the UK and internationally about girls' education, primary education through to secondary, because of the links between educated girls' ability to choose, having children later, marrying later, and so forth. So that's been a very important part, that gender differentiation, but done in a way which is overall supportive for healthy populations and for economic growth, rather than trying to single out one gender over another. We're sort of careful to use the evidence there. And the last thing, of course, is, we'll talk about this on this panel as well, is the burden of care and the care economy. So having children at school takes pressure off the mother or the parents at home to provide the care at home, freeing them up to do other things in the household, potentially to work or just to rest. You know, and I've seen firsthand how that's actually worked when we've used really innovative ways of getting money, cash, through financial tech, through fintech, to mums who are able to then spend that money on vouchers which send the children to school. She has more time at home to do all sorts of things. So when you get it right and when it works, it can be really transformational.
Great, and you started off there with something that I think is really important about what drives the investments that you make. And in this shrinking fiscal space and the challenges around aid that are well known to many of us in the room, you know, your first point about we need to be sure about what every pound, I suppose, in our case, you invest in, what that reaps and what the benefits are. So, and that's what's brought you to this idea that actually this investment in care, in the early years, in education really makes sense for these much broader sort of development goals. So I think that was an excellent sort of way to make us think about this. And I'm going to come to you, Diana, now, because you come from, so the IDB covers a region that has given us some of the best evidence and examples of what's needed to invest in the early years. Whether we think about Jamaica, which many of us have quoted how many times, the rich evidence that's come from there to support child development, whether we think about some of the most amazing cash transfer programs that have helped to address poverty and address some of the key barriers to children doing as well as we want them to. So you really come from a region with great examples. And I'm wondering, thinking about the cross-sectoral approach, how we need health, how we need education, social welfare, you know, what is the role of a bank like yours to support these sort of catalytic investments in these sectors to support young children? And beyond investments, like what else do you think banks like yours need to do to really encourage this more investments in young children?
So thank you, Manisa, and thank you for inviting me, for having me here. And I think, again, I want to echo how vital and important this discussion is at these times. And on that, I think that, of course, we think of multilateral development banks and we think, okay, finance. And I'm going to leave that aside because I think that's a given. But I really think our role is helping make that compelling case. Helping make the compelling case and helping it make in a continuous fashion, in a way that's not led by political cycles, but that we continue to make it, that we bring and we open the policy dialogues, we bring the stakeholders and the different stakeholders to the table, and that we make this, show the evidence. I'll echo Melinda's point on building and helping construct the evidence, but really helping make the compelling case. And I think the compelling case, if I were to add the different points that some of them have already been mentioned, and the minister mentioned a few, which I agree with, I think there are at least 4 that we need to nail on. And I know the moment I say 4, then of course everybody's going to say she missed this and this and that, and that's part of it. So, but let me just at least put 4 on the table with that, which I think one is, it's fundamental for child's development and for the generation and for the country and for human development, and to avoid leaving children behind and making, right? We know, basically we need to be there showing the cost of inaction. What does it take, both on the development of the children themselves, but also on GDP, and also as a argument. You know, we know the Lancet figure of like the cost of inaction being 3% of global GDP. Those type of arguments I think we have to put on the table constantly, especially at moments of strong fiscal constraints. I think the second argument is, and in no particular order, but I think the second argument is how investing in the early years creates jobs and improves labor conditions. And creating jobs, I think the case of Uruguay, there's this study, right, of like if we invest 2.8% of GDP in early childhood, then, and in child care services in particular, then this could create 80,000 jobs. And I mean, this is Uruguay, a small economy. So what is a small country, not a small economy, 80,000 jobs, right? And more than 600 million in fiscal revenue. So making the argument of how investing in childcare services creates those jobs, a lot for women, but a lot for others, and how it increases fiscal revenue, I think is it's a key point. I would also add the productivity part. One of the risks of Latin America, or one of the problems Latin America and the Caribbean has not been able to overcome, is this stagnant productivity, right? And investing in childcare reduces absenteeism, right? And we know from everywhere, even in the US, a study that shows that absenteeism related to the lack of affordable childcare costs this country an estimated $49 billion every year. That's a lot, $49 billion every year, because there's not enough or affordable childcare, which impedes, like, it has us all asking for permission, going here and there, right, especially women. So I think linking it to how it can boost productivity, I think is an important argument to add to some of the issues being raised here. And lastly, I'll echo, Minister, your point on we need to invest in this to really, if we want women not being trapped in time poverty, and a time poverty which prevents them from continuing their school, their education, participating in the labor force, and everything else. Like all of our other investments are going to fail if women are trapped in time poverty. And right, we might want to create many jobs, but if there's not enough childcare services and early child development services, women will not be there or be retained. Or we might open all these programs for women on STEM careers and startups, anything you want to mention where we want women. We will eventually either not access or drop out if there's not enough of these services. So I think that link, when we have to make strategies under fiscal constraints, is absolutely key, and that's our role.
Wow. I don't know if the Secretariat for this campaign was listening, but there was our case that we sort of need. We've been trying to think about making the compelling case, and there we had it. And I think there are some really critical, I think the most important point you raised there, though, or idea that I've come to hearing you speak, is that there's on the one hand the financing, but actually almost equally important, if not more important, is making that compelling case and that link. And this being, and if a multilateral bank is making that case and making that link to its main clients, was often presidents or ministers of finance. That's a really critical role for an agency like IDB to play. And I think it links us very nicely into the bank of all banks, Louise, if I may say, the World Bank. And, you know, one of the main ambitions that we've heard this week is about, you know, building us up in this campaign and to this moment where we can discuss commitments to investing in the early years. And I think quite a lot has been the focus on domestic financing and how do we encourage governments to themselves make the investment in the early years, which other partners can come in and leverage off and be catalytic around. And I really would love your reflections on what the role of the World Bank is in mobilizing and increasing investments in the early years. And, you know, what you have seen, you've worked in this field for many years, what you have seen as being really critical in encouraging presidents and ministers to make that decision to invest in the early years.
So I have a tough act to follow, having sort of, you know, so many thoughtful and sort of meaningful sort of contributions already made. So I'm just trying to, you know, rack my brains on what else I'm gonna bring to the table. You know, look, from us at the World Bank, again, I think it's sort of, you know, I look back, I've been in the bank for about 25 years now. So I look back at the early 2000s, and, you know, we had a really, truly tiny sort of program in the early years. And now, so, you know, 25 years later, we can say that it's about 25% of the overall education portfolio. So it has grown by 6-7 times in size. It covers a wide variety of low-income and middle-income countries. It covers a wide variety of sort of types of interventions. But I think also, like, you know, so perhaps in recent years, one of the most striking strides that we've made is that it's, you know, early childhood development and sort of investing in the early years and childcare. It's not solely looking at sort of the traditional human development sectors, you know, looking at health and nutrition or looking at education per se, or perhaps sort of, you know, going into the social protections field, but really how to really sort of engage all of the other sectors, whether it's transport, whether it's energy. So as to sort of really to think about childcare and early childhood development from a multidimensional perspective. Secondly, I think that sort of, like the investment case, I think that has already been made very eloquently. Perhaps the angle that I would bring also to the table, so also being sort of the man in the panel, is how to address social norms about childcare. Again, I think that this, there was a number of mentions about sort of, how childcare can foster female labor force participation, can sort of allow women to get better jobs, but also it's important to bring to the table sort of, again, so that access to childcare is also an avenue for men to get better paid jobs, and also how to think about sort of men as caregivers, caretakers, and the roles that they play in the family is truly critical. And so sort of thinking more broadly about sort of childcare will help us to be sort of, again, sort of be full members of the issue and sort of, to tackle it together. And then sort of, your more precise question is, what is the bank doing in this space? Again, sort of in IDA 20, which is now coming to an end, the World Bank made sort of a series of commitments about sort of how to, about investing in childcare. I think we surpassed. I think the target was about 15 countries. We surpassed that to now working in 18 countries and growing. The investment in childcare work sort of, has really sort of now has over 100 initiatives, across the world with teams, including from our sister organization, the International Finance Corporation. So I have to think about sort of, the private sector and private sector's role, and then really sort of, how we've embedded early childhood development and childcare in a wide variety of corporate commitments through, for example, our corporate scorecard, through our IDA 20 and 21 commitments, but also in terms of sort of, how to really sort of, again, reinforce the notion of working cross-sectorally, so that this is not just a silo issue, but it's a whole of the bank issue.
Yeah, great, thank you. And I want to come, I should have told the audience this, we're going to have another quick round of questions, and then I'm coming to you. So I hope you get ready with some thoughts, reflections, and questions and ideas you might have as well. And I wanted to come back to the panel now, maybe to be a bit more specific about some of the things your own agencies are doing, which are really critical in this space. And I think it would be really great for us to bring that out. So Melinda, if I can start first with you in the role of the UK government, that's been a really big champion and supporter of the International Financing Facility for Education, which really made a bold commitment to have at least 10% of its financing, of its education financing, going to early childhood education. And so I really wanted your thoughts much more broadly on how you think innovative financing and innovative financing mechanisms, and you can go beyond education, but that relate to the early years, like how do you think they really can enable us to shift the dial for children globally?
Goodness. So I think you're right to broaden it out, because the starting point for innovative finance is the recognition that ODA is really scarce. And when we used to talk about ODA, we would talk about a pound in and getting a pound out. Nowadays, and I'm sure the World Bank and the IDB know this, we really need to innovate to stretch that as much as possible. Taxpayers' money is increasingly scarce. I mean, I can say in the UK that the consensus on international development spend is it's very, very tested. It's going down overall. We've just reduced our budgets. So we really have to think very hard about how you get maximum leverage out for every pound you put in. And goodness, that's been on the lips of everyone this week at the Springs. This sort of big question about P-CODA, past P-CODA, architecture reform, efficiencies, really driving it, how you do that. So innovative finance in the round is the future, but it's part of this wider question of, in a world where we have a lot of mutual challenge, global public goods challenge, what does the modern development finance landscape look like beyond ODA, using innovative finance, but also working and supporting countries on their own domestic revenue mobilization and making sure that they can grow their economies, channel their revenues, work with them on their strategies, their plans, their public expenditure management, their financing strategies, in order to achieve the goals, the developmental goals that they want. So IFED is one example of that, right? And there are many more examples of how we are thinking about innovative finance, guarantees. Actually, we provide a guarantee to IFED, working with insurance and pre-arranged finance so that we can have pools ready for when natural disaster hits, blended finance, risk capital that we can use for private sector mobilisation. I mean, you'll know all of this, for private capital mobilisation, tackling illicit finance flows. This is all part of the modern development finance landscape that that we hope to really champion when it comes to the Finance for Development, the fourth Finance for Development conference, the UN's in Spain later on this year. But particularly for education, the funding gap is very big, and we cannot only use ODA in order to resource that, in order to fill that. So the whole point of IFED was to leverage MDB capital. So every pound in, I think you get 7 or 8 of affordable MDB loans out. Now, you're not only increasing the volume, you're also reducing the price. So countries can borrow more to fund education. So they're more likely to use the evidence that we talked about before in their education sectors and think, where isn't that investment going to go from other sources, and where can we really use the marginal capital to invest in a particular sector or at a particular age? So we want that to be part of their financing strategy, because they need their own domestic resources, private resources, as we heard about before, and philanthropics and others. But it is an absolutely critical part. I mean, I should say, as wonderful, innovative magic money trees are, it really doesn't solve the problem, particularly for countries that are very, very poor, and for households that are very, very poor, that can't afford to borrow. So we really need to make sure that we are matching volume and price to affordability. But where you have very poor countries and very poor communities, that's where the grants really need to be concentrated. So I'm sort of describing to you a very big picture of development finance and how you work within that to make the right choices about where the sort of the highest rates of concessionality are versus the more expensive, based on ability to borrow.
Yeah, and I think you've pointed something really important in this last statement you've made about how far those kinds of mechanisms can really get to the most vulnerable populations and the really most hard to reach. And I want to link that to bringing you in, Diana, because IDB has launched, I think, 2 main initiatives that I do think speak to that agenda, and I want to think a bit more with you about how you think that also supports the early years work. So there's been the IDB Cares initiative, which is all about strengthening the care systems, but there's also been the Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty at the G20. And I wonder if you could tell us a bit more about how you think those things can be both catalytic to this agenda and discussion, but also thinking around that area of making sure we're not leaving the most vulnerable behind.
Indeed. So I do think part of the role of our banks is also going from, you mentioned silos at one point, Luis, and I think it's moving from silos to comprehensive ways of approaching. And comprehensive means a lot, but really comprehensive at the level of different agencies working together, comprehensive of internally working together, the private arms of multilateral banks, the innovation parts. But so basically, these are struggles and attempts to what does it mean to really build comprehensive systems. And I think the IDB had been working for more than 15 years on improving early childhood development. We have Florencia here, who has worked extensively on it, now from NYU, but other colleagues here, and working on the outcomes of the most vulnerable, right? But gradually this idea that what else there, but on the other side, we were working on people with disabilities that require support, and the other on the older adults. And then there's the interest of women. And attempts like the initiative called IDB Cares is we need to build comprehensive care systems. And we need to bring in the private sector and the public sector, and we need internally in the bank. So that's where it comes from, coming from years of working on all the populations needing care and on the caregivers, and now saying, how would this look together? How do we address the very high demands? So it comes basically from that challenge, and also what we could call a triple challenge. We have a lack of quality and coverage of services in Latin America and the Caribbean. We have an over-reliance on unpaid care work, and we have the challenge, which is going to make these already two challenges there even like on track of getting worse, if I may, which is the unprecedented aging of the population. So when we bring these different agendas and these complexities, it requires us to build comprehensive care systems. And that is what this attempt is. It's an attempt to how do we look at this agenda with those, from the bringing in all the populations together, right? And we've learned, for example, Japan teaches us that while it's the super aging country, one of the lessons from Japan is, we shouldn't have left. We focused too much on the older adults, and we missed focusing on early childhood development and early and childcare in the beginning. So the goal of an initiative like IDB Cares is calling for an increase in investments, both on caregivers and on the three populations that require care and support, and thinking on what is it that we need. And we need a pillar. So one of the pillars is governance and finance. Like, what are the structures that need to be in place? And the structures meaning not only the laws, but for example, what are the policy regulations we need right now to invite also the private sector and the entrepreneur sector to come in and try to create new services for these different populations. Second pillar, how do we improve care delivery on the ground? What do cities need? What do metropolitan areas need? What do governments need? How do we innovate and quickly bring in new policies, new service provision? And the third one, going to your point that I'm delighted that you raised it, Louise, which is on the shared responsibility of care. So how do we bring in new actors? How do we bring men into the field? So that's why this is a call to work jointly with partners, and to embed the importance of the early years with the other populations, especially because in Latin America, once you go into a household and in low and middle income countries, usually all the care needs coexist. It's the same grandmother caring for her grandchildren, for another elder person, for someone with disabilities. So it's that comprehensive approach and the comprehensive investments. So also there's incentives of not working so much in silos.
And actually, that's a nice segue to this last point for you, Louise, because you alluded to the great work the bank has been doing in support of childcare through the Invest in Childcare initiative. And it's been doing this work around policy, around regulation, around impact evaluations, as well as around unlocking resources. And I wonder if we could maybe dream here, as we're now in the IDA 21 implementation stage. You know, what are the ambitions of the bank in terms of how that can scale and impact on children and on childcare more broadly?
So let me build on what Diana was just saying in terms of the importance of having a sort of a comprehensive outlook. And just a couple of years ago, since Minister Fatt is here, like the World Bank annual meetings took place in Marrakesh, and I had the good fortune of going to visit some of the early childhood centers in Morocco. And I think that what struck me then was first sort of the high quality of the service delivery, but at the same time, sort of that was largely is also a reflection of the importance of engaging in a public-private partnership type of arrangement where each sector capitalizes on each other's comparative advantage. And then at the same time, again, as I think of sort of, more broadly sort of at the financing space, again, I think that it's important for us as we go in our efforts as various stakeholders in our support of government counterparts as to how to expand coverage, is around sort of, how do we leverage our own institutional comparative advantages so that at the end, the whole is more than the sum of the parts. And so, again, coming to your question, Melissa, sort of, much of our work is done in partnership with the Hilton Foundation, with the Lega Foundation, with UNICEF, with the IDB collaboratively, with CGD and Theirworld, sort of, again, so to think of sort of, how do we think of better coordination and better integration and better leveraging of our own institutional capabilities, so that, again, going to your questions, so we can think of, like, on one hand, we need to mobilize the financing. We need who's best at mobilizing the knowledge, who's best at mobilizing the civil society organizations that have a greater granular understanding of what happens on the ground and what it's needed, how to attune service delivery to the particularities of vulnerable groups, or how to support different types of stakeholders around an intervention, female labor force participation, social norms about care, and whatever it might be. And so as we go forth, us at the bank are really sort of trying to truly embrace those efforts, so as to sort of, maximize also the juice, the potential, the impact that early childhood as an intervention has in a holistic that cuts across. And then that enables us, again, in our efforts to expand coverage, to being able to attune messages to different stakeholders, to different constituencies, to different governments, as to sort of what is the crucial issue that they're concerned about, and in that sense, how ECD can be a channel to achieve those goals.
And I know we're going to come now to, we've got a few, I know, contributors from the audience, and I know the first contributor is really going to want to add on and piggyback onto that last comment around the role of, what are the role of others in this space? There's the role of the banks in terms of the financing, the compelling case, development partners with financing, technical support. And you talked about civil society, and that was mentioned before, the role of civil society, making the case, bringing some of the great examples forward, and actually holding governments as well, and all of us, to account. So I'd love to come to the audience, and Brett, there you are, Brett. And I wanted to cut, so Brett is from the ECD Action Network, which is the global network supporting early childhood development. And Brett, Louise spoke about the Invest in Childcare initiative, and I think the work you've been doing as ECDAN to really mobilize civil society around this childcare agenda has been fantastic. So I wonder if you want to sort of share a few reflections on what you've heard today as well.
Yeah, it's a great segue. First, let me just, so I'm Brett Weissel with the Early Childhood Development Action Network, and let me just first recognize the energy and momentum behind investing in the early years. It's exciting to see it emerge, and so let's recognize that. But just wanted to share two quick initiatives from ECDAN that will contribute to these efforts, but also to invite your participation in them. And so the first is, I think it's important to recognize that it's not just about financing the policies and the services, right? It's about financing the movement behind those policies and services, and to build public demand and to build political will to make those investments, because we know that that is a crucial and critical ingredient in policy change. And so we spent, as ECDAN, we spent the last year talking to about 130 partners, consulting with 130 partners of ours about how to do that. How do we strengthen and catalyze local advocacy, specifically to strengthen childcare systems? And what emerged from those conversations was what we're calling, it's a new collaborative initiative that we're calling the Childcare Advocacy Research and Engagement, or CARE initiative. And the vision behind that is to bring civil society movements from early childhood gender equality and workers' rights, to bring those movements together to strengthen capacity and to catalyze local advocacy, to hold governments accountable, to push for those investments. And so we are going to be launching this new initiative in Bangladesh, South Africa, and Tanzania, and are inviting proposals right now from those countries, from partners in those countries. And so we hope that this is a model that we can replicate to increase domestic financing, because we do need that. We do need that civil society activity. We do need that grassroots pressure to ensure that governments make these investments and that civil society is at the table in designing policies. And then a second initiative that I just wanted to highlight is, as we build momentum behind financing the early years, it's important to unpack the how of financing, to recognize, how can countries improve efficiency? How can countries expand their fiscal space? How, what innovative models can be leveraged or adapted across different countries? And so ECDAN has organized a working group, a technical financing working group for ECD, we're going to be unpacking these questions and more, and really trying to highlight promising practices and successful models and share those across countries. And in addition to that, we're going to be organizing a financing forum, a technical forum, where we're going to explore a lot of these issues in real depth. And so just wanted to highlight those initiatives, both to bring partners along and to share and to encourage participation in them.
And thank you so much, Brett, because I think what's very important about what you shared is the role of different constituencies in this space. So you've talked about civil society, coordinating civil society, having that voice there. And you've also talked about convening partners around a technical issue. So if there's a question about we need more money, hopefully the answer coming is to do this. And we're sure about the evidence of this and the quality of this. So thank you so much for that intervention. And I'm going to come to Wendy from the World Bank. And what I'm going to say, Wendy, before you come in is, I think you're going to speak on something I haven't actually heard so much of in the conversation today, which is about support, I believe, for care entrepreneurs. So we've got the idea about care to support women and fathers as they go to work, but actually what do we think about those providing the care, and what's the role in supporting those care entrepreneurs? So would you like to say something on that?
Yeah, thanks so much. I'm Wendy Teleke, and I'm the head of the Women Entrepreneurs Finance Initiative, which is housed at the World Bank. But we also support the IDB, IFC, and other multilateral development institutions. So and we believe that women entrepreneurs are an important force multiplier. We're, of course, at the spring meetings this week. It's all about jobs, and women entrepreneurs are very important job creators, especially because they create jobs for women in economies. And this is really important for many of the countries that we serve. They need to get their female labor force participation up in order to grow their economies. So this is really important. And as we scanned the industries where women are as entrepreneurs, we found that, or we see, I think it's obvious, that women entrepreneurs are very well positioned to be leading businesses in the care economy, and that to grow the care economy, women entrepreneurs are going to be very important. Of course, the public sector is critical, but we see so many great examples of women entrepreneurs leading and creating businesses that are able to scale childcare services. And we had an event up at CSW in New York and heard from Tej Kaur in Kenya, who's created a Smart Start business, which has trained 3,000 care providers, and they also have their own care services in Kenya, improving standards, improving salaries and whatnot. So we're looking to do more in this space. We're happy you mentioned Japan. They've funded us to do some more work in this area. We will be working with the MDBs on that. But I wanted to get the views of the panel on where you've seen good examples of the private sector coming in, of women entrepreneurs participating, and how they fit into the ecosystem where you have a lot of investments in the public sector, and how do we bring the private sector in as well?
Okay, thank you. I want you to hold on that question. I'm going to come to our last intervention from the floor, and I've deliberately left this last, Liana, because I would love you to really talk about what the role is of civil society networks in supporting advocacy to increase investment in the early years. And you've got just a couple of minutes on that so we can get to the questions, but really would love your reflections.
Thank you, Manisa. Hello, everyone. My name is Liana Gent. I am leading the European ECD network, ISA, International Step-by-Step Association. As you may know, there are regional networks in other parts of the world, Asia Pacific, the Arab world, and Africa. And what we do, we call ourselves as the invisible connective tissue. We mobilize our member organizations, our member national networks, and they are, I think the panel referred to them, really, they are on the ground, as Brett was mentioning. They take the pulse of what are the needs of their communities, but also they work directly with their governments, local governments and national governments. And they are not, their role, please don't think of them only as the watchdogs, pestering the governments, but rather also informing and assisting. So I can share many examples examples, our members in different countries sitting on technical working groups, advising governments and ministries of education in the processes of reforming their education law or improving policies. I think we play a very big role also on issues related to quality and access, quality and equity. So it's not, the panel also referred, and the minister, it's not enough to secure seats and increase access. It really needs to go hand in hand with quality, equity, to make sure that we support inclusion. So we are, as networks, with our members on the ground, we are vehicles not only to channel information top-down, but also to support bottom-up influencing and advocacy. And we're delighted to join the Act for Early Years campaign, and we've been campaigning for years, but now I think speaking with one voice and having a clear ask will make us all more impactful and powerful. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Liana. And Liana is representing, as she said, the International Step-by-Step Association, but there are similar networks across the world in different regions. There's the Africa Early Childhood Network, the Asia Pacific Network, and the Arab Resource Collective, representing Africa, Asia Pacific, and Middle East and North Africa, respectively. So that's the work going on across many regions. So thank you so much for that. And now I'd like to turn to the audience. We already had one question around good example of supporting women entrepreneurs, but very happy to take a few questions and then or reflections. And I would ask, as the mic's coming round, please no preaching. Could you just, ask a question or share a reflection? It's a late Friday night for some people. So Chemba, I see with her hand in the back, but please feel free to share your reflections. Welcome, Chemba.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you for a very insightful discussion. My name is Chemba Raghavan. I'm a senior advisor and acting global lead for UNICEF on early childhood development. Fantastic reflections, made me think quite a bit, and we are co-conspirators with the World Bank on childcare and with a lot of the other partners seated here on early childhood development initiatives around the globe, as you know. My question, and perhaps a reflection also, is that we love hearing terminology around comprehensive care systems. Of course, they answer the comprehensive piece that we all need to look at. One thing that our country offices and field, workers come back to us with is the role of informal workers. And I think we haven't heard much about that. Of course, comprehensive care systems should cover them, but that's a specific population, workers in the informal economy, and care for them, care for their children, care for their carers. Those are extremely important issues for us to reflect on. Not expecting an answer, but just a reflection on that. And then a second population we heard about, we heard about children with disabilities, people with disabilities. Of course, that's a big area of work that we need to focus on as well. A third population of interest that we are hearing about quite a bit from the ground is children in humanitarian contexts. So I just wanted to put those three populations on the table. Yes, comprehensive care systems, but there have to be tweaks and specific address of these populations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chemba. I see another question here.
Thank you. I'm Ishani Khanpal. I'm a senior fellow here at CGD. I guess this is a question for Diana, maybe Luis. Luis, you talked a little bit about the quality of services that you observed on your field visits in Morocco. And that got me thinking, whether or not we're at peak ODA, I think we can all agree that in the short run, we are in a time of less funds to go around. And this is a sector where I think the quality of service delivery is particularly important. So when there is less, and there is less to shore up the fundamentals, to make sure that the quality of service delivery is high enough, how are the MDBs thinking about the cost effectiveness of the money that you will be spending and ensuring that minimum quality threshold?
Great. I can maybe take one last one, and then I'm going to go to the panel. Just one here. Oh, I think I did see you first at the back. Yeah. Hi, Katie.
Thank you. This is an excellent panel. I actually had a question for Her Excellency, Miss Nadia Feta. you know, Morocco is in such a unique position with high-level championship and ample funding and unique sort of modalities. But as you had mentioned headways, and as our world is facing a lot of, you know, headwinds and really changing circumstances and frequent crises and fiscal constraints that we haven't faced in about 70 years, how can ministers of finance defend the ability to put resources toward human capital in through the early child development avenue when there are so many competing demands? And what has her experience been in how she's been able to defend that in her context?
Thanks very much, Katie. I'm going to suggest...
My name's, yes, Katie Anise with Coalescence Advisory Services and the Child Finance Facility.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to suggest maybe that's a question that can be picked up when we have the reception later on. But I do want to come to one point maybe specifically that Chemba was raising about, we've said it before, about those that are left behind. So women in the informal economy, children with disability, and children in humanitarian context. I'm not going to take all of those because of how long it might take us, but I want to not forget that. And I wondered if anyone wanted to take the children in humanitarian context, maybe Luis. And Diana, can I give you the quality of service question as well around that balance between scale, fiscal resource constraints, and making sure we maintain quality. So, Luis, on the humanitarian side, maybe quickly. Thanks.
So you know, like, look, excellent points. At the end of the day, sort of, you know, we care about early childhood development because it's an opportunity to support children to have the best possible start in life. And those who are most vulnerable, those who are in situations that are most critical, will benefit the most of the sort of early stimulation, early support, early nutrition that early childhood care can bring. And so our attention and our prioritization of such groups is truly fundamental. And so the need for, as I mentioned earlier, attunement and so providing services that are appropriate, that are so respond to the particular needs of those populations, that so the circumstances in which they are find themselves in, the types of you know, social settings that they're in, again, all becomes critical because maybe a link to the quality question. We also know that poor quality services not only don't necessarily have an impact, but actually can also be detrimental. So all the more so to really focus on sort of how to truly sort of serve in effective ways, and again, drawing from the literature, drawing from sort of indigenous knowledge, taking advantage of the sort of civil society organizations that have an understanding of what's happening on the ground, and then ultimately leveraging sort of you know, both sort of, you know, the large institutions that might be able to mobilize the financing, or sort of, you know, using sort of, you know, the government channels, you know, to bring attention and to bring action, to bring the political will to serve those children. Ultimately, sort of, you know, oftentimes in situations where there is also displacement or you know, humanitarian, so just also to be specific to the question, so, you know, how to really sort of, you know, being able to integrate children into sort of the host population, so, you know, really becomes oftentimes sort of, you know, the possibly the most effective and streamlined, and how to really sort of think about making those types of interventions win-win situations, not just only for children that are displaced, but also for the host communities, is also a way to really sort of, you know, spread the benefits across the population widely.
Thank you. Before I come to you, Diana, I just want to say Minister Feta has said she would like to answer that question. So, Minister, please, over to you.
Okay. Thank you for your question. I think we've been investing in human capital, education, but also social policies and direct money transfer. We started last year for 4 million households, and 2/3 of this money, it's $2.5 billion a year mostly. 2/3 of it goes to families with children for preschooling and schooling. And to make the long story short, we had an increase of tax revenues by 30% in the last 3 years. So the evidence is there because people, I would say, have the possibility to have a job and to contribute to the growth of the economy. Thank you.
Thanks. I'm just going to ask Diana, could you give us just maybe 1 minute on that question about, I know it's not cruel, it's cruel to do that, but on the balance between the quality and that scale question we had.
So let me just echo on what Luis says, but with a specific example, perhaps that's quicker, on how one example of where we've tried to do that at the same time, which is in a case of Mexico in the Luciérnaga program, where the bank was really monitoring not only the investments in the Early Childhood Development Center, but the interactions, the quality interactions between children and the care providers. And it was a very in-depth monitoring that at the beginning, and the institution says we didn't believe the results. And it was, so that's where we found that it was important to do, because it was so like, no, that's not happening. The quality is happening. No, there wasn't that. We were able to identify that the interaction of the caregivers and those receiving care at the early childhood centers was not of quality, and that was a way of ensuring that where we were putting the money was also having that, and then having an impact, and then designing a program, not only the recommendations of how to improve those interactions between the caregivers and the care receivers, but the importance of bringing people in to accompany the implementation of those recommendations. So if I were to say, it's like taking the risk of not waiting 10 years to see how that program took place, but being willing to go in as the program is implemented or shortly after. Lesson number 1. Lesson number 2 on going beyond the list of recommendations and bringing in the people on the ground to accompany the implementation of those recommendations.
So course correcting in real time.
In real time, and not just waiting for long-term impact evaluation 10 years down the road when those in place can no longer make the changes.
Great, thank you. I'm going to have to wrap up now, but I would love to just give each panelist maybe a minute or so to reflect on anything you want to leave us with today after this great discussion. And perhaps, Melinda, do you mind if I start with you?
I think, as ever, it comes back to what is the evidence of what actually works? Because for me, and for all of us, I'm sure, spending many years in this sector, it's very tempting to be drawn into campaigning approaches or really willing something to work. And the evidence of what works really paramount. But I think the key thing for me is investing in that evidence and being willing to change our minds, being willing to do course correction, being willing to look at contexts where this is really hard, the fragile states and humanitarian context, disabled children, and understanding what evidence you need in order to understand what works and make difficult policy choices. That's what gives you the strength at the end of the day. It's being able to show that the investment pays off.
Thank you. Luis?
Just perhaps to reiterate the message that, the importance of investing early, that this are the foundations on which we build the houses of our lives, and that ultimately these are the skills that we get, all the other skills that we want and will need in the future to have healthy, productive lives.
Thank you. Diana?
May I take the time to bring in the informal caregivers?
Sure, you can do it in a minute.
Yes, so in a minute, I think that what's happening more and more in Latin America and the Caribbean is the focus on the caregivers and how we can't leave them behind. So there's initiatives and programs on the ground like the Utopias in Mexico City or the care blocks in Bogota that actually say, what do we need, how can we avoid more caregivers and more women falling behind because of care? What is it they've sacrificed? How do we give them the ability to graduate from high school, learn how to ride a bike, start their own entrepreneur while the other people, those they care for are being cared for? So I think those type of models that focus on the caregivers are focusing mostly on the informal caregivers and are key to bring into these comprehensive care systems. And just one line is investing in early years benefits 8 billion people.
What a way to end. Now I think we can give them a round of applause. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Over to
you, Mary.
Behind you here. Just to close, I want to say a huge thank you to our speakers. I think we've covered a tremendous amount of ground today. We've talked a lot about evidence and really needing to continue to build that and what works, especially during this really critical time. We've talked about successful initiatives and ongoing initiatives, some new things that are popping up and how we can collaborate. We've talked about some examples of success and where we can build on that and build momentum. And again, not just collaborating across sectors, but also stakeholders and a lot of what's happening, and especially MDBs. And then so much evidence, right, and across spaces on what the returns are for children, for women, and for economies. So I feel a lot more hopeful than when I started this conversation today. I hope all of you feel that same way. I think, you know, it's easy to get caught up in a lot of the things that are scarce right now, right? But I think we have a lot of really good momentum and, again, good evidence about how to move forward with this agenda. In closing, I want to again thank all of our speakers so much. Let's give them another round of applause. Thank you. I also want to thank our incredible co-organizers from Theirworld, especially Justin Van Fleet, Ben Hewitt, and Michael Simpson. Yeah, round of applause. The Gender Equality and Inclusion staff who were instrumental in this event, particularly Kelsey Harris, Alba Loriero, and Asa Manali. And this is the final event at CGD during spring meetings. It's been a very ambitious week. I want to really recognize our incredible communications colleagues who have put together and seamlessly executed this suite of spring meetings events hosted at CGD. And with that, thank you to those who joined virtually so much. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you. And for those of you who are here in person, let's keep this dialogue going. We hope that you can stay and join us for the reception and keep this going, the dialogue going. So thank you so much.